This is a very brief introduction to Christianity and its spread over the empire. I'll look at mostly the early part. The next slideshow will look at briefly at the late part. But the key thing here is this group I've been referring to from time to time, the Hebrews, who are in the Roman province of Palestine. And their main exception is that they are monotheistic. They have one God, and refuse to worship any others. The problem with that is in the Roman Empire, you're expected to be worshipping, you can worship your own gods, but you're also expected to participate in the Roman holidays and worshipping the various gods and worshipping deceased emperors as gods themselves. It's part of being a Roman patriot, is worshipping the emperors who have ascended to godhood, as well as the main Roman gods, which for most polytheistic people, they're like, yeah, fine, we'll worship all the gods. We're cool. The Hebrews refused to worship emperors and gods, of course, which tends to make people very suspicious of them. You're not loyal Romans by just worshipping your God and not what a good Roman's supposed to do. And so they get persecuted. They often revolt and rebel. That's why they end up spread across the empire, is because when you have a big serious rebellion, one way to sort of chill things down is take a bunch of the rebels, park them somewhere else in the empire. Now you got a few hundred Jews over here in Greece. They're not going to rebel because they're surrounded by they're massively outnumbered. So scattering around the empire, it's called a diaspora. That's going to be important for the spread of Christianity. Rebellious Jews have been scattered around the empire, and various rebellions have been oppressed. One of the predictions that Jews have been looking for is what's called a Messiah, which is a person, a descendant of King David, who's supposed to come and take leadership as a king, take leadership of the Hebrews, defeat whichever empire is lording it over them. Remember, they're always under someone else's empire, and free them and lead them back into their independence and so forth. So they're usually looking for someone who's a traditional sort of military leader, one king wannabe. Some of those messiahs lead some of these revolts and get themselves and a bunch of other people killed. Other ones go around preaching things and they get themselves who's this nut? And then we get Jesus of Nazareth, who I'm just going to give you the historical perspective. Jesus of Nazareth is basically preaching something completely different. He's saying you've got the idea of the Messiah completely wrong, essentially. The idea of the Messiah is someone to lead you away from the kingdom of earth to the kingdom of heaven, right? The kingdom of earth doesn't matter. The kingdom of heaven's what's important. And, if the Romans are in charge, the Romans are in charge, right? Render unto Caesar, pay your taxes, obey the Roman laws, be a good citizen. Because that's just the earthly matters. They're not important. What is important is living as a true follower of God's laws, and to love thy neighbor and help yourself and others reach salvation in the kingdom of heaven. So it's a very sort of otherworldly preaching, very weird for what many people expected. It's very much about, let's not run around killing each other, right? Let's be neighborly. Love thy neighbors as thou would love thyself. The least among us, the widows, the orphans, the lepers, the sick, the sinners, the poor fishermen, right? Those are the people that he speaks to, that says these are the least among us are the ones, right? That the wealthy and the powerful. Wealth and power are things that take you away from being a good follower of God, that take you away from salvation. It's not about wealth and power. It's about being a humble, simple, loving person. And it's a very unique message. creates a lot of havoc as people are like, is this guy a Messiah? If he's a Messiah, he's a crazy Messiah, right? Yes, he is. No, he isn't. And this turmoil leads to eventually the prosecution and, of course, crucifixion of Jesus. And that is a normal, right? The Roman governor at the time, Pontius Pilate, is doing his job. Sounds odd, doesn't it? Right? There's trouble in his province. Now, normally, like I said, he's not going to care what the Hebrews do. If they want to run around and do this, that, and the other thing, as long as they're peaceful and pay their taxes, he's not worried. But when you start getting them fighting amongst each other, and there may be this Messiah guy that may be leading them down to some weird stuff, it's like, okay, my province is getting a bit out of control. I need to settle things down. Who's the chief troublemaker? This Jesus guy. Okay, boom, crucified, trouble solved, everybody's at peace, done my job. That's his viewpoint. Okay. Now, of course, the disciples of Christ, the followers of Christ, claim that he was resurrected from the grave several days later, and it is proof that he is the Messiah, that he is actually the Son of God. Okay, that he is not just an ordinary guy, not just a descendant of David, but the Son of God, because he was resurrected and went to heaven. And he did miracles, which are evidence of the grace of his godhood. So they begin teaching, and some of these disciples have become what's called apostles, which is spreaders of the word. And they begin teaching, preaching to the Jews that this was the true Messiah, and that Jesus is God walking on earth in human form. I'm very oversimplifying the nature of Christ. And that, right, that following Christ's teachings will lead you to salvation. If you're baptized into Christianity, right, it's a mystery cult. And remember, that's a perfectly normal thing, right? Baptized, follow the teachings of the person you're following, in this case Christ, reach salvation, okay? And it is first amongst Jews and being taught to their various communities across the Mediterranean, but later under an apostle named Paul, they decide this guy's a Messiah for everybody, not just the Jews. Let's go teach it to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews. Let's give them this path to salvation. Okay, and so then the word spreads from these Jewish communities, some of whom have become Christians, followers of Christ, and they begin preaching to their neighboring Gentiles. And over time, we get the growth of Christianity. And as it grows, you then begin to sort of organize themselves. And there's two ways they organize themselves. One is creating a church. A church is basically where the Christians get together and worship in common. It's not just a building, it's a community. A church is a community of worshipers, okay? And you organize the church. So, and you see this in the early writings in what's called the New Testament, which I'll get to. In that you have a deacon, which at that time could be male or female, who is a person sort of organizing the community, helping the presbyter or priest, okay, who sort of, right, did the rituals and the sermons, you know, was the sort of shepherd of the community, who knew the holy words, the holy writings, and who did the rituals of baptisms and so forth, and who led the community and taught and preached. As Christianity grew, you've got lots of these communities, lots of these churches all over the empire, and so they begin to sort of say, okay, we need to sort of help keep things consistent among ourselves. Okay, how are we, as Christian broader community, the community of Christians, right, rather than this the community in Corinth or the community in Rome? What about the broad community? How do we sort of organize that? And so what you get are episcopoi, who are sort of supervisors. They're in some of the biggest cities, and they're sort of overseeing. These episcopoi overseeing the various priests, right, presbyters in their area. Episcopoi is translated in English to bishop. So you get the creation of bishops, who are people overseeing, right, regions. So the community in their region is sort of kept sort of organized. The most ancient and most prestigious cities have what are called patriarchs, which are bishops who are considered the main leaders of the entire Christian community. And there are 5. Don't have them written on the slide, but they are Rome, of course, okay? And that's the only Western city that has a patriarch. And by the way, in Italian or Latin, patriarch is translated as papa or pope, okay? So in the West, there is one patriarch. The other 4, of course, are in the more heavily urbanized East. And they are the patriarchs of Constantinople, which is going to become the capital of the Eastern Empire. So sort of a later thing. Constantinople. Antioch, right, a big city built by the Hellenistic Greeks. Jerusalem, the ancient, right, home of Christianity. And, of course, Alexandria, the great port city in Egypt. So Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch, and later on Constantinople, the capital of what will become the capital of the Eastern Empire. And then in the West, Rome. These patriarchs, these fathers, are in these oldest or most prestigious cities, and they are considered the main leaders of the Christian community. So you've got your deacons, who are sort of organizing things, your priests, who sort of are shepherds for their own church. You have the bishops, who are right over particular regions, sort of keeping everything running, and then 5 of the bishops are the patriarchs, the head. So we've sort of organized a church. The next thing we do is you have to figure out what are the Christian teachings, what are the beliefs of Christianity, and most importantly, right, in terms of what are your beliefs and what are your teaching, what are the holy words? What is the word of God? Okay. Now, the Old Testament of the Hebrews is considered the word of God because it predicts the Messiah and so forth, and gives really good teaching. So the Old Testament is considered the word, but then they put together the New Testament, which is the Christian sort of overlap, and in some ways, right, the next step from the Old Testament. The old laws are no longer needed. The crucifixion of Christ is considered the ultimate sacrifice, so that no more sacrifices are required. You don't have to sacrifice goats anymore. Okay, no more sacrifices. The old laws are gone, and the new laws are in with Christ's sacrifice. Okay, and you noticed, right, the Old Testament was full of rules. Leviticus and Deuteronomy, rules and rules and rules and rules, and you got to sacrifice, and you've got to, right, it's very old world, very similar to polytheists. The new one, there's 2 rules, right? One is to love God, and one is to love thy neighbors as thou would love thyself. Literally, 2 rules. And then, how do you do it? So it's a very big change. What are these books that become put in as the New Testament? And it's going to take them actually until the year 387 in a council in Rome of church leaders to finally officially decide what's in the New Testament. So from about shortly after Christ's crucifixion, when people start writing about what he said and what he did, to 387, you've got a lot of different books going around. There's no Bible. There's just a whole bunch of these different things, and a lot of people reading some, and some people reading these, and over 300 years it's just, what do we have? So in 387 they officially decide, looking at among themselves, this is the official New Testament. And of course what's in it are the 4 Gospels, the 4 writers who write about Christ's deeds and words, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you have a bunch of what are called, then you have Acts, which is a book giving the actions of the first apostles as they spread the word. And then you have a bunch of what are called epistles, which is Greek for letters, which are letters written mostly by an apostle named Paul, but by other people too. There's other epistles in there, but mostly from Paul, which are letters to different early Christian churches, giving advice on what it means to be a Christian, what was Christ meaning when he said this, and right, what is Christianity? And then you have a very late work called Revelation, which is a sort of allegory for a dream, which is present an allegory for sort of a vision of how the end of time may happen. Okay, so remember, it's a dream sequence, so it's an allegory, it's not literal. And you have then the Bible, the book, the Holy Book. Other things may be read, but they are not the official Bible. So there's other Gospels, there's other epistles and other works which are decided they're not quite needed in the Bible itself, so set aside. And we have the Bible and we have the church. Now, for up until the year 311, the Christians will be occasionally persecuted. Most of the time, people leave them alone. They're just, another mystery cult. But they are monotheists, just like the Hebrews before them. And again, they do not participate in the worship of emperors or the official Roman holidays and official Roman gods. And so again, like the Hebrews, they are considered, therefore, suspect, possibly not loyal Romans. And from time to time, certain emperors will engage in heavy persecutions of the Christians. So the Christians have to be somewhat underground. But like I said, it's not constant persecution. It's on and off, depending on which emperor. And then locally, depending on the governor's stance on things. But it will grow. And by the 4th century, by the 4th century, maybe as many as 30% of Romans have become Christians. It's a very popular faith, right? This idea of the lowest, the most humble, perhaps are the ones who are highest in God's eyes, and that the quest for wealth and power are not holy, are not sacred, right? For so many ordinary people, it's such an important special message. I, a humble slave, can achieve salvation. And it's a positive, loving message. It's not about you have to do this or kill these or limit your belief to only these people. It's like, no, this is a message of love, of hope, of faith, right? That is very positive. So it's becoming quite popular. Enough that, and I'm going to talk about the Edict of Toleration, the official church in the last slideshow in the late empire. But eventually, the Emperor Constantine will say Christians are tolerated, they're loyal Romans, we don't need to force them to worship emperors or gods, they're loyal Christians. And that's going to allow the Christian church to become more open. In fact, various emperors will convert to Christianity, and then in the year 380, the Emperor Theodosius will make it the official church. In other words, if you want to be a Roman, you have to be a Christian. And then it's going to become the majority religion and grow from there. So that is probably the biggest change in the Roman Empire. If you look at what I've looked at, right? Most cultures are left alone. Romans do the process of Romanization, of becoming a Roman. But it is this big empire of people becoming Romans. Christianity is a big, huge cultural, absolutely huge cultural change, where more and more people become Christian. That is the big change of the Roman Empire. Because if you notice, one thing I haven't talked about is technology and things like that. It's a slave-based society. Slaves become your main labor. There is no technological change and very little change in knowledge. They took the Hellenistic knowledge that the Greeks had been fermenting around in their dynamic states, but they just use Greek philosophy and change it. So there's minimal change in knowledge, minimal change in philosophy, minimal change in technology. It's a big, stable empire with a lot of slaves doing the work. No change is needed. So Christianity is a huge change. But a Roman, besides Christianity, can look at the empire in the year 350 AD and the year 350 BC, when they're just starting, and go, it's the same. This is the same culture, the same society, the same technology, the same buildings, the same farming techniques, the same philosophy, zero change. You could call it stable. I actually personally call it stagnant. Okay? But Christianity is a very significant exception to that and a very huge change. I'm not going to talk about it, but it might be a good, useful study guide. The last slide is the legacy of Greece and Rome. The next slideshow talks about late Rome and the sort of important things there. But I thought this would be a good point to put this. So those are some key words that might help you. Right, so that's that. Next is the transformation of Rome as it late empire transforms itself, and that'll be that for Rome.